Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Shingo Virtual Conference. And it's going to be about embrace scientific thinking, which is under the guiding principles, as you can see there below on the slide. My name's Tracey Richardson, and I'm going to be doing the keynote today. I know that it said Ernie and myself, but from a logistical standpoint, it's sometimes difficult to not step on each other when we're in the same space or close to the same space. So you're going to be with me today. So I hope to share and lead and learn with you as we go through some of the aspects of the Toyota engagement equation as it pertains to the embrace scientific thinking part of the Shingo model. So a little bit about me. I'm from Toyota and I was hired back in the late 80s, 1988 at the TMMK plant in Georgetown, Kentucky. And I started as just a team member in plastics. And I was really motivated to move up in the organization. So I went to what they would call pre-promotion, kind of like school. It was a curriculum that you had to follow. And I worked up to team leader and I spent time in that position, got to spend time in the model change team, which we call pilot. Learned a lot, had a lot of Japanese trainer influence in that time, and then went back through the curriculum that was necessary to be a salary leader, which is called group leader. So I spent 10 years on the production floor in various groups in plastics. Have maybe 100 hours of class time in Toyota philosophy, thinking, culture, those types of things. And then in 1998, moved as a contractor to human resources training and development, where I was training not just at TMMK, but across all the plants at Toyota in North America, which is a pretty awesome experience for me to get to see all of the variations of model mix and how the lines were set up and just the people development side, new folks coming in and meshing them with folks that had been integrated into the system for a little bit. We enjoyed simultaneously learning together as we were growing with Toyota in North America. So that's a little bit about me. I've spent the last 23 years at Toyota in the mid 2000s, but externally started teaching Lean Incorporated in the early 2000s. So did a little bit of toggling at Toyota and outside and external. Little did I know it turned into more external as things grew and the demand for the thinking. You know, Toyota, we say that it's about development of people that just happen to make cars. So it's really not about cars, it's the thinking behind any culture. And I'm going to share some of that with you today as we go through the slides. And there's going to be one slide that when you have access to this later, also a handout. It's called Line of Sight, and I'll address that when we get to it. So you'll have that to take away from it. So let's get started into it and talk about how do we embrace the scientific thinking. So a lot of times, as we know, we think about the tools and, let's throw this tool at it. Let's do this. Sometimes we start with 5S, right? All those S's. And I think there's probably 20 different S's out there today if you think about all the different versions of how folks describe that. And so when you think about 5S, just for an example, a lot of folks just initially think that's about cleaning, right? We're cleaning up things or tidying up things. And so if we look at it from just the tool perspective, we failed to really explain the why. Why is it important to do 5S? And for team members or process owners or folks that are doing the work, they really want to understand, what's in it for me? Why do I need to do this? It looks like extra work. So if we don't change that paradigm and focus really on the people side of it, why is it important and how is it going to help with my work and for what the team does and how that supports the department? It's that kind of cascade upward to what the organization needs as far as KPIs. And so one of the things that to differentiate, the tool and the thinking of the tool is, again, to ensure people understand and engage and involve. I tell in the Toyota engagement book, I tell folks, we don't want to sell or tell or convince anybody of anything. We want to engage, we want to empower, we want to involve people with us, and not talk at them, but talk with them to engage in the tools or the thinking that we might be bringing in. So that takes us to the DNA. So we know the macro level DNA is kind of, our fundamental, what makes us who we are, right? So in an organization, that's also true from a discipline and accountability. I say and really fast, and it sounds like in. So the DNA is the discipline and accountability for these tools, things like standardization, because 5S rolls right into standardization. And when we have that, we're able to see abnormality, at a glance really fast, and it allows process owners to know when there's a discrepancy. And so if we go back to how, some folks are trained, we think about the JIT, the job instruction training, or some folks call that the TWI training. We look at, that's training within the industry. We look at the what and the how and the why of that. And that is how we also look at tools. So when we look at what are we doing, how are we doing it, and why are we doing it, that's the TWI method when we break down a job. But we also want to do that when we're breaking down the thinking behind the tool. And that allows us for that DNA, that discipline and accountability for what we say we're going to do, not only as process owners, but also as leaders in the organization. So wanted to touch on that because sometimes the tools are just the flavor of the month, and they don't take a stake in the ground and hold with team members and or leadership. We need that support. So are we asking the right questions? And as a leader every day, or even as process owners, the folks that are out there doing the work, and guys, this doesn't have to be about manufacturing. This can be any functional area within an organization. So you look at human resources, you look at accounting, you look at, R&D, you look at engineering, maintenance, just all the things that make an organization work, whether you're creating something, a service, an output, a widget. We think about what questions are we asking, and how do we know? How are we measuring each day to understand where we are against what we would call a known standard or the should be state. So when we look at that, we have to ask ourselves, do we have leading key performance indicators, KPI, that are kind of predictive in nature and allow us to kind of get to the problem before we have to have a report to tell us we have a problem? Or, do we have those lagging indicators that are, after the fact, and we wait for the information to react. So we're reacting to something we don't necessarily maybe know what was happening at the process at the time. So we really need to understand questions, and that's geared at the Gemba. And the Gemba is the actual workplace, where the work is happening, whether you're in an office setting, an admin setting, whether you're on a production floor, whether you're in a healthcare facility or, a hotel, you could be checking folks in. It's a process that creates a service or an output. So what should be happening is the question, and also what is currently happening. And we want to look at the measurable gap. Now, I'll underline that here because I think it's very important. If we don't measure between the should be state, and that's AKA the standard, or some folks might say the ideal state, then how do we know? If we change something, how do we know that we made a difference in it? And, a lot of times there's these rapid improvements, and we're always trying to make a really quick difference, and we implement something and we don't always measure, hey, did it work? Well, it seemed like it got better, but my trainers would always say, seemed like is subjective. How do you know? And what data, in fact, are you substantiating that with? So those are three very important questions. And of course, they're followed up with many more after that. But mainly when you think about this, how do you or me or anyone as a leader, get your workforce, the people that are doing the work, the primary process owners, to perform in a way they didn't think they were capable of. And, that's exactly what the leaders and my Japanese trainers did for me at Toyota. They were looking at me futuristically in a way, even going back to my testing. They were looking at, does this person have the competencies? And those are things like listening, problem solving skills, your ability to work with a team, your future leadership skills, personal initiative. Those were the 5 initiatives and not initiatives, the competencies that Toyota were looking for in people, that they could say futuristically, will this person be a leader in the organization? Can we mold them? And so if we go and look at the bottom part of the slide, we talk about questioning mind. And if we look and say, what do we actually know and how do we know it? And that's the confirmation with our own eyes at the Gemba, at the process, with the folks that are doing the work every day, to confirm that we're not making assumptions. Or, tribal knowledge is really, really good, but we have to confirm what we know. Sometimes tribal knowledge, we have to update it, right? We have to bring it up to what's happening today. And so it leads us to the question, what do we need to know and how can we learn it? And I think that's very, very important to understand. Where do we need to go to find it? And it takes us back to, how do we measure that? And doing that on a daily basis by asking very important questions, starting with the 3 there that you see. And there's many more, but those are the 3 most important questions. So let's move on. So when we think about kind of a macro viewpoint, I use this slide internally at Toyota, and I kind of integrated it outward to kind of fit any organization, really, from a macro standpoint to a micro standpoint. And I'm weaving in parts of the Toyota engagement equation and how the scientific thinking, we're trying to embrace that, obviously, and look at the PDCA and that thinking. So from a macro, a large standpoint, when you look at these circles, you see the whole picture, all the way from Hoshin Conry, which literally the Japanese translation of that is directional management. Some folks call that strategy deployment. But we look at that business planning, and if we go all the way into that little purple GTS, our trainers would call that grasping the situation. And so when we started thinking about writing the book and looking at how do we explain this inner core or this inner making of our cultural infrastructure at Toyota, how important it is to understand what we kind of consider leadership standardized work, or the doing that we are, inside our daily work every day, as you can see that broader circle. So the GTS to the 6th power plus E cubed equals DNA was a way that Ernie and I articulated the equation, which is what the book is about. It walks through and gives folks the ability to replicate the cultural infrastructure Toyota had from a people development perspective. Not making cars, it doesn't have anything to do with that. It's the thinking, it's the culture, it's the leadership, it's the go and see, it's the standardization, it's the visualization. It's all those things together that allow the synergy, if you will, to work as one, and everyone is aligned. And we'll talk a little bit about that later. And so if we look at each of the GTSs, so if we look at the first one, go to see, folks will say go to the Gemba, let's go see, GTS 1. So there's a lot of things to that. When we're in our sessions with private clients or in conferences or in person, we really dig deep into this go to see and what's that about. And, what's the purpose when you go to see? It's not just a, hey, it's a tour, or do you see me? I see you, but it's a lot deeper. So once we're there, we look at grasping the situation. Now, if we go back to the 3 questions, what should be happening? What is the current state? And what is the measurable gap that would be considered grasping the situation. So we need to understand how to frame that problem, right? So that allows us to get to the solution. So we've had to get to root cause, we've had to look at countermeasures, and we're going through the process. I'm going to show in the next slide what that looks like from a more micro standpoint in PDCA, kind of weaving in the TBP 8-step methodology. So once we get the solution, again, this is a high level kind of 50,000 foot view if you're kind of in an airplane looking down. So then we need to get to standardization. Standardization is the key for improvement. As Ono said, if we don't have standards, we can't have continuous improvement. So what are we measuring from if we don't have that, right? So then we standardize, we make sure it's meeting the internal and external customer expectation, and we look to get sustainability, some can say stability there, in order to ensure we're ready to get to stretch, GTS 6. So stretch means raise the bar, right? We're going to move the bar on the goal. So we're going to stretch where we are. And our Japanese trainers used to say, we're going to purposely make a problem or make a gap. And I used to think, wow, we're going to make a problem when we don't have a problem. It's like, that was really hard for me at first to understand. Why are we making problems when we don't have one? But that truly is the Kaizen. So if you look at E cubed, what we want to do is have everybody every day engaged, and I like to add a couple more, empowered with empathy out there and encouragement. So you can do E to the 6th if you want to. Those things are very important to create that equal sign back to the DNA, the discipline and accountability for our culture, for our people development, for our branding, who we are. And be proud of that. I know when I walked in, I was proud to be part of something because they were engaging me with it. There was no telling. I was involved in all the work, and it was it was empowering for me to know that my voice, my thoughts made a difference in the work. So if you look how this looks in our daily work, and you can see how it can expand out for organizations from a micro to a macro standpoint. So wanted to touch on the equation. And then I wanted to show you in this slide is if you look at it, embracing the scientific thinking and the plan, do, check, action, you know, we're looking at how to break down the P, the D, and the C, and the A, right? So the majority there, steps 1 through 5, are the plan phase. You know, people say if we don't invest in planning, then, you know, the implementation may be a little, you know, risky. We might not get what we need. We may have to have a lot of rework because we don't invest up front. So look at all the nuances that are within the plan phase, you know, recognizing abnormality and understanding the purpose. Again, why am I doing this, and how does it pertain to a company KPI, the key performance indicator? Going into the questions, framing the gap, and then as we go through the TBP, and obviously we won't have time to do that today, but this kind of gives you a snapshot of how you would roll through the problem solving and even create A3 thinking through this. This is how it breaks down using that we talk about in the Toyota engagement equation. We beat it into the equation. So it's really neat how when you look at how much is in the planning phase, how much we had to invest all the way up to countermeasures before we can ever implement, because I see so many organizations implementing very quickly. Oh, we've seen this before, here's what we need to do. And when you think about that statement, I've seen this before, we got to listen to our own verbiage when we talk. That means I've done this before, it's probably rework. Here's what we need to do. It didn't fix it the first time. So what do we need to do this time? And so we need to end the cycle of Band-Aids and getting to symptoms. And this really allows us to do it. So I wanted to add this in just as a kind of a breakdown of the PDCA as we get into the nuances of the equation and the TBP. That's the Toyota business practices that I learned there, and the 8-step problem solving thinking. So next slide, we're going to talk about the line of sight. And so, you know, we've talked about a lot of things from a cultural standpoint. And we're looking at from that macro viewpoint to the micro. Now, how does my work, when I look at my role and my job every day, what am I doing? What's the work? And how do I connect or contribute to the KPIs from what I can control? And those are quality, those are safety, those are productivity, those are costs, those are HR training and development aspects. So I want to be able to connect my work with that. So this was something that I learned in the early 2000s when Toyota created the Toyota Business Practices. Line of sight was a mandatory exercise for all managers, leaders to go through to kind of clarify, as you can see going across, what is my role? What is my responsibility of that role? What's my job's purpose? The goals that guide my job's purpose, and then how does that connect to the company goals? Some would call that the true north, some would call that the vision or the mission statement. But I've got to ask those questions and take a look at that and connect. Otherwise, I may not be doing value add work. You know, I may have a conditioned norm to rework even written into my standards. I've seen that in organizations where rework is actually written in, and they're so conditioned to that as being the norm, they can't step out of it to see this is not what I should be doing. This is non-value add. So what I did in the next slide here, and this is the handout that's going to be provided for download, and it's you can do front and back for one copy. Ernie and I use this with our private clients. We actually gather leadership together at times. These were the questions that were asked, and it's kind of going upward in this example. And I won't have time to read it all to you, but what I did, this was my personal line of sight when I was actually in HR training and development at TMMK and the other plants from North America. So what I did as a trainer in human resources, I tried to make the connection going upward to say, how is what I'm doing as maybe a problem solving trainer, how does that connect to the company goals? And that true north is at the top there. Customer first, producing the highest quality product at the lowest cost in the shortest lead time in the safest manner, all while respecting people. Now notice all of our KPIs are baked into our true north. So that gives me the opportunity as the process owner, as the person solving problems, how am I connecting upward? So you can read through that in the slide, in the handout, and go through that. I encourage you to do this yourself. And I also encourage you to do this with your teams. I think it's very important for folks to understand, does everybody first and foremost understand our values, principles, and true north? A lot of leadership that I talk to can't even recite the values and principles. Like Toyota Way, there's 5 values. And to understand those, articulate those, make those tangible. You know, I do a lot of posts on LinkedIn that I kind of share this information. It's very important to do that. And so day one, my hire date was August 1st of 1988. And I learned that company goal there at the top, and I can recite it today. And I'm not even an employee. It was that embedded. So take some time on that. I think it's very important for folks to understand their work, and again, cascade it to the team, cascade that to the department, and then how that goes upward to the organization. I can make a connection with what I was doing in instrument panel, inspecting those dashboards, and how that fit the KPI of the organization overall. So we need to have that connection so we feel that. So back to E cubed, everybody, every day engaged. So if we go back to thinking about the vertical and horizontal alignment of the organization. So I call it the plus, the vertical and horizontal alignment, which makes the plus. So from CEO to PPO, that primary process owner, I want to be aligned with specific language. and going across all the functional areas. Like I said, HR, accounting, you can have payroll in there, you can have R&D, you can have engineering, quality control, manufacturing, if that's what you do. All of those different, some call silos, but all those different functional areas, we got to look through the same lens and look for the waste across our processes, just from a micro standpoint, and then collectively at a macro standpoint. And so that allows that line of sight to come in. And this is where the cultural infrastructure begins to really mesh. When everybody has a clear vision towards that, we visualize it, we have standards, we know when there's gaps. So I think it's very important from a perspective of, again, everybody every day engaged in those circles when we go and think about framing problems, measuring, is this leading, is this lagging? It really helps everybody to understand and differentiate those two. The next slide talks a little bit about, again, the DNA. So again, our micro DNA is about looking at our individual contribution. So, you know, what are we doing in our work every day that allows us to be successful as a whole? We're all like parts of a recipe, and we're all an ingredient, and together we make a great batch of chocolate chip cookies, if you will. I guess I'm getting hungry. It's close to lunch for me. But if we look at our macro DNA, we go back to the, what are the characteristics that we want? And that can be competencies as well. I talked about the listening. I talked about the teamwork, the leadership, the problem solving skills, our personal initiative. If we think about that lens and cut that across all the functional areas, and we think about, you know, we hear sometimes the difference between the push and a pull system. We want to be able to draw folks into wanting to learn, not push them into, you have to do this. Remember, we don't want to sell, tell, convince. We want to engage, involve, and empower. So again, we have to look at that vertical and horizontal alignment from a micro, what am I doing? From a macro perspective, what is the organization doing? And how are we slowly pulling folks to create that great brand, that great place to work, where people are first, and that development of people never ends, that you feel like you're, again, part of, not bringing along with from a push. So, you know, I want to kind of wrap up in saying that when we look at all of the aspects of PDCA and standardization and visualization and our line of sight, right? And what are we doing each day? How are we measuring? Can we differentiate leading indicators, which again are predictive? It allows us to predict a problem. So where in the process can we put something to, as a flag to say, when something happens here, that allows us to catch it before it goes any further in the process, which can become lagging key performance indicator, then we're reacting to it. So all those things together, how we measure, what questions are we asking, how much are we spending at the Gemba with the process owners, the folks that are doing the work, all those things are to help us embrace that scientific thinking model and under the PDCA, and from a cultural perspective, developing people. So I just want to say thanks for tuning in and joining me today. Our emails here at the top, both myself and Ernie. I also want to say I'm on Twitter, so at Tracey_Son. So Tracey Son, don't forget the underscore. And then you can follow us both on LinkedIn. I have a hashtag there called Sketched Wisdom, and it's growing. If you go there and you want to join both of us, there's a lot of information. I like to share a lot on LinkedIn. I want to lead and learn with folks, folks like you guys and others. So I just want to say again, thanks. If you have questions, please feel free. I hope you get to download the PowerPoint, take a look at it a little bit further, and take a look at the handout for the line of sight. I encourage you to use that. And if you want, grab the Toyota Engagement Equation. I think you'll find it a great book. It's Ernie and I's 30-year Gemba journey with Toyota. And we hope that you feel like when you're reading that you're walking along with us as we were leading and learning. So again, I want to thank each and every one of you for being here. I appreciate it, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you.